And now it's time for us to discuss more of these headlines and simple keywords with Adam joining us via Zoom. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, Lena. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday indeed. We've made it.
Another week has passed.
All right, let's jump into our first keyword of the day. We're going to try to clarify some of these major headlines for our local listeners. This is our first pick.
Robot policy.
The government has announced measures to foster the robotics industry as well as other regulatory reforms. It's not just about making our life convenient, is it? It could be used in the face of disasters, rescue efforts, for example. It can obviously use as weapons to concerns lie, but it is the future, the way forward.
Right, there's a lot of use cases for robots, and there's been a lot of kind of regulatory restrictions in Korea. There's been kind of criticism that Korea is a bit tough on those rules, and it's a bit slower than other countries in trying to get these robots out there and basically helping out in our daily lives, and such as deliveries and air taxis we've seen as well, and stuff like that. So that's why there's related traffic laws that need to be eased, and the government is well wary of that, and that's why the government has announced certain reform measures for it. This came after Prime Minister Han Duck-soo presided over a meeting with relevant ministers on these regulatory reforms. He announced reforms for 51 regulations, to be precise. Robotics was something that was discussed among them. Over 76%, or 39 out of a total of 51 projects, will be swiftly implemented by 2024. Self-driving robots will be allowed to move on general sidewalks and crosswalks as early as next year. So we could see us sort of walking the streets alongside these robots, which I think will be a bit new and needs to get a bit of getting used to. Now, the government will also soften the conditions for a regulatory sandbox within this year as well. In Korea, autonomous robots are classified as cars, interestingly, under current law, which means their movements on sidewalks and crosswalks and their access to parks are basically prohibited. Now, the government also seeks to have self-driving robots to aid police on nighttime patrols by the year 2024 as well. The government also seeks to expand the robotics market into a $83.1 billion market by 2030. So wants to increase investments and support in order to kind of spruce up that industry. Underpinning the drive is the accelerated commercialization of smart mobility services. So your delivery drones and air taxis, for example. Now, a greater number of robots will be used to promote public safety, as well as faster transport services, environmental protection, as well as medical services and smart farming as well. We've seen a lot of reports coming out of these smart farms using a lot of robots in terms of farming. Eased and revised robotics regulations will be announced in April, so we'll get more details of that in a couple of months. The meeting also discussed a temporary industrial standard for the metaverse as well, this kind of virtual world that we've been hearing a lot about. Now, the government also promised to boost exports as well and attract tourists by reforming 108 related regulations towards that. Of course, this comes amid slumping exports, which Korea has been experiencing lately, as well as trying to revamp the tourism industry in Korea as well, which has, of course, taken a hit during the pandemic.
Speaking of, slumping export numbers, let's talk about the chip industry. There's a $53 billion plan out of the U.S., a mix of subsidies and conditions that will test the U.S. industrial policy. And it does affect South Korea greatly. This is our second pick of the day.
Chip concerns.
Concerns are rising among Korean chip makers and the government over Washington's CHIPS Act. So what's the latest, Adam?
Right. So now the Act will require companies to share excess profits and provide childcare programs in order to receive semiconductor manufacturing subsidies from the U.S. government. But I won't go into too much details of what the Act entails because we went into that previously. Now, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, the top two Korean chip makers, and also one of the top chip makers around the world, they're busy counting their potential losses due to the new law. They are also factoring in potential damage from what's known as the guardrails in the CHIPS Act that basically prohibits companies receiving subsidies under the Act from making new investments in China for a decade. So it basically essentially forces Korean companies to choose between either the US or China. Now, the amount of semiconductor products produced by the two companies in China is close to 40 to 50% of their totals, and the proportion of their sales in the two companies' total sales stands at 30% as well. So, of course, China is a huge market for these two companies, and amid this US-China trade war, it kind of brings South Korea again stuck in the middle of those two rivalries. Now, another area of concern companies point to is the sharing of excessive earnings. Now, although specific standards or provisions related to excessive earnings have not been presented yet, companies receiving subsidies of more than $150 million must submit their detailed financial plans, including cash flows in advance. If their actual earnings exceed this limit, or up to 75% of the subsidies awarded must be paid back to the US government. That essentially limits stock buybacks and dividend payments as well. So shareholders probably won't be happy with that, of course. There is also some backlash from within the US that the rules are too excessive as well. So it's not just a concern for Korean companies and ship makers outside of the US, but there's also some criticism domestically there as well. Experts say the Korean government's role has become more important than ever as well. In light of that, the government said it will hold discussions with US officials to fully reflect Korean companies' position in implementing the CHIPS Act. So some more diplomatic efforts being needed in terms of these what critics are calling protectionist policies in the Biden administration. We've had the Inflation Reduction Act as well, where Korea companies are concerned, and now the CHIPS Act also, especially in a time when the semiconductor market has been dwindling, and of course Korea being a major exporter of semiconductors, it is obviously an area of concern for the government as well, not just the private sector.
So navigating business uncertainties becoming even more complex. So we'll keep tabs on it. As you've said, it seems government efforts and their diplomatic endeavors seems to be more important than ever before. Let's move on to our third keyword of the day.
Pension loss.
The question has been, will we be able to get these pensions? The National Pension Service has reported a negative 8.22% drop in assets, the lowest since 1988 when the National Pension Fund began operation. So the prospects not so good. Tell us the details.
The prospect is certainly looking a bit dire at the moment. And this is all basically mainly due to a contraction in global stocks and bond markets. So basically things that are kind of outside of the control of the Korean government, all those geopolitical issues, the Russia-Ukraine war, for example. Now, the NPS's total assets fell by just under 80 trillion won last year to 890.5 trillion won. It was the first annual fall since 2018, when the fund's assets fell by 0.92%. By assets, local stocks and bonds fell by 22.7% and 5.6% respectively. Overseas stocks and bonds each lost at 12.3% and just under 5%. Alternative investments increased, though, by about 9%. And that's why the NPS said that the alternative investments, amid the strengthening dollar, managed to soften the blow a little bit. So still more bad news in terms of the National Pension Service. Of course, the Yoon administration has touted reforms and pledged reforms in terms of pensions. That's one of the three key areas of reforms that President Yoon has been promising. But financially now, it is still not doing very well. And I just found out that since I'm a British citizen, even though I'm paying tax or paying the pension, I won't be able to actually get a pension by the time I retire. So that's a sticking point for me. Just a personal anecdote there. Just to put that out there. Just, you know.
I'm sure you're winning in some other regards, but that's certainly not good news for you, was it? Oh, dear. All right. I'll leave it there for now. Let's move on to our fourth keyword of the day.
Stronger alliance.
So a ranking U.S. official has reiterated Washington's will to build extended deterrence against North Korean threats. Can you run us through what he said?
Right, so Eli Ratner, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs, was speaking at a forum hosted by the Hudson Institute. He said the purpose of deterrence is to show the cost of aggression will be higher than what the aggressor can bear. He added that the US is also working to build the confidence of South Korea in US extended deterrence. We are focused on readiness and we are not going to slow down because of these threats, he said. And he added that the US is in the process of strengthening its extended deterrence while also working to reassure Seoul of US commitment to the defense of South Korea. There's been some concerns and some criticisms that maybe the US may be backtracking on its kind of military and security pledges and protection of South Korea. But the US, Ratner, along with other officials, have kind of been reassuring Seoul that that isn't the case. But now, Ratner also noted that the Allies were doing site visits to US strategic sites to see and understand, as well as meet people there. He stressed that it's important to remember the goal of these activities, which is to deter aggression and to deter conflict. And he said the focus is on ensuring that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un doesn't take risks that go way beyond his capacity. So some ominous, stark warnings there as well.
With that, we move on to our final keyword of the day.
Veterans Agency.
So President Yoon has signed bills upgrading the Veteran Agency to a full-fledged ministry and establishing a new agency in charge of affairs related to overseas Koreans. What's the latest?
Right, so this is actually the first time that Korea held a presidential ceremony signing bills authorizing changes in the government's structure. They're usually done in-house and reported on later. The presidential office said it held the ceremony reflecting Yoon's intention to properly honor patriots and veterans and show that the president is keeping his promise. Yoon said he will never forget national heroes and patriots who responded to the country's calls, vowing to honor them with respect during the ceremony. Now, although the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs is described as a ministry in its English name, it is actually a lower level than other ministries and does not have the same authority. For example, its minister is not actually a member of the cabinet, and it does not have the authority to issue its own ministerial decrees. That will change from June. In fact, after 90 days of preparations, during this process, Yoon must name the minister for the new ministry. The current head, Pang Min-sik, is likely to assume the position, though. So basically just the same head of the now upgraded ministry. Now, the revised act also called for the creation of an agency handling policies on overseas Koreans under the foreign ministry. That's also happening in June. And Yoon said it was a pledge he has been making whenever he met Koreans abroad.
Thank you very much, Adam, for a week's worth of coverage. Have a safe weekend. We'll see you Monday.
You too. Have a great weekend. See you next week.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.